All right, we're back. Peace, everybody. It's your boy Bleak. Welcome to another installment of Scarecrow's Chamber. Now, today, stepping into the gaming realm on this one, upon request of a buddy of mine, we're going to talk about a wrestling series that started in the early 2000s. Some of you may know about it. And at the time, the brand was WWF. Of course, it's WWE today, but back then it was WWF Smackdown. So that's the series that we're going to be talking about. Hopefully, I'll be able to pack this all in 30 minutes, but if not, break it off into different sections. Money, this one's for you, buddy. From fucking. Now, when SmackDown first released back in 2000 for the PS1, I believe it was around like a March, around that time, around like WrestleMania time when the game came out. And before the SmackDown series, it was a Japan company, Exciting Pro Wrestling, back in the late 90s. And it was released by the THQ company. The THQ company developed all these other sorts of wrestling games before that, Versus the World, World Tour, Revenge, WrestleMania 2000, and No Mercy. And then right after that, the SmackDown series came to play. Now, the SmackDown series was very, very different compared to the 64 wrestling games that came out. When SmackDown first came out, it was very, very fast paced. It had more of an arcade style to it, and of course, it featured all of our favorite wrestlers from that era. This was right around the Attitude Era, going into Ruthless Aggression, but it was still around the Attitude Era. All of our favorite wrestlers at the time, guys like Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Undertaker, and, many, many more. Triple H, and many more. Now, I can remember my initial feeling when I saw the commercials and when the game was being released and stuff like that. And the crazy thing about it is when the SmackDown brand was created, I guess you can say that The Rock, some of you may know him as Dwayne Johnson today, but The Rock, he was kind of at the forefront of it. SmackDown was kind of a catchphrase that he would use. And it was very, very intriguing how they decided to, the WWE brand decided to create the SmackDown brand. And of course, as the series went on, they came out with different installments called, Know Your Role, and just bring it and shut your mouth and stuff like that. And then the final one of the SmackDown series, just SmackDown series, it was the last one was called Here Comes the Pain, and that was really a reference that Taz used to refer to when they were Brock Lesnar. That was kind of a Taz catchphrase that he came up for Brock. But initially, it was Rock. It was all his catchphrases and stuff like that. But when I first played the game, very, very different. Very, very different. It had a very extensive roster, and especially the second game. Know Your Role probably to this day probably still has the biggest roster out of all of them. I could be wrong about that, but Know Your Role, they put everybody in that one. From people from managers, they only had more divas in there. The McMahons, they were always playable characters in all of the games, but it was very, very extensive. And initially in the beginning, it was more comic, more arcade style, stuff like that. So especially in the second game, when the second game came out, they had like these cartoonish sound effects for certain different attacks and stuff like that. It was very, very funny. And my buddies, we would play them day in and day out. But initially in the first installment, they had your single player modes, your 2-player modes, and obviously when the PS1 came out, they actually had this thing called the multi-tap, and the certain games went up to 4 players, but as long as you had that multi-tap, you were able to play 4 players. And SmackDown, they also had a season mode. In the beginning, they called them season modes. Now they kind of call them now that the 2K games that took them over, what the hell did they call? I don't even like My Rise or something like that. Just technically still it's like a season mode, but it kind of goes into like a little story. But even in the beginning, the first one had a story as well. Really don't remember much of it because it was so long ago. But different array of special maneuver. And one thing I did like about the first one, when you played it, it was this feature that you can turn on to every single move that you did in the game. It would be subtitled. I believe only the first two games did that. For example, if you did like a DDT, it would actually call out the DDT. It would spell it out and then subtitles on the screen. Whenever you did a signature move, it would the letters would be in gold. And another unique thing about it is whenever you would do a finishing maneuver, regardless of who you were playing as, the Smackdown logo brand will kind of like come across the frame. It would do that all the time, and this progressed throughout all of the games from. I guess you could say it progressed all the way up until the 2K games. If I'm not mistaken, I kind of fell out with them later on. But the initial 5 that came out, it was just so unique. I mean, the soundtrack and stuff like that. I mean, that was a very big thing for wrestling games back during that era. You always had BGMs playing during the matches, and the music was very very cool and very very. You had a cross between like hard rock and later on it added a little bit of hip hop in there and stuff like that. So it was very very cool very different to see, especially for a wrestling game. And the one thing that they started to add in wrestling games later during that era, when SmackDown came out, there was a feature where you can create your own wrestler. That was probably the biggest thing that really really stuck out for me in particular. And even though the features weren't as sophisticated as they are today, but the fact that you can create your own wrestler, that was a pretty cool thing that you can do. And you can also play with them in the season mode, and very 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 cool. And obviously, as a wrestling fan, anyone who's a wrestling fan, you know about all of the well-known match types. You got your one-on-ones, your tag teams, your fatal four-ways, your battle royals, your royal rumbles, TLCs, table ladders and chairs. Who don't know, ladder matches, cage matches, Hell in a Cell, casket matches and stuff like that. Your Inferno matches, and I don't know if those last two were available in the first game. No, they weren't. But and also it was something that was introduced. Well, I guess you can say introduced. I mean, No Mercy did have it, but it had a backstage feature where you can actually choose different venues where you wanted to have a match. You can have it in the famous Broiler Room, which actually, and that was the thing about the SmackDown games. It was like you were watching television for the most part, especially as the games became a little bit more polished, and the graphics became very very concise and very very tight and clean and stuff like that. And that was the one thing that my buddies and I, we were looking forward to every time when the next game would be introduced, especially around the the Just Bring It and Shut Your Mouth time going into Here Comes the Pain. The one thing that we've always wanted to see what the finisher is going to be like. Because in particular, let's take Stone Cold Steve Austin, the Stunner. The Stunner on the first game, it looked exactly like how The Rock was selling on television. Rock was for anybody who's a wrestling fan, you would know, like, nobody sold the Stone Cold Stunner like The Rock did. Rock, he would always do this crazy handstand move where he would flip backwards and stuff like that, and it was just hilarious to see. And that's one of the beauties of wrestling, is just how the people who are on the receiving end of the maneuver, how they would sell it. And the crazy thing about it, the Stone Cold Stunner is basically just a drop. It's just a jawbreaker. Technically, it's just a jawbreaker type move where Steve Austin would set you up with the toe kick, and then he would lock his arms around your neck and then just bring you down for like a jawbreaker. And for someone like The Rock to make a move like that even more devastating by selling the move, that's what made it even crazier. And the crazy thing about it is THQ or Yuke's, the Japanese developers who were developing these games, they took very very serious notice of that. As the the installments were coming from your roll into the Just Bring It to the Shut Your Mouth, especially I'm telling you, especially around Shut Your Mouth. Shut Your Mouth, if you ever played that game, it was like you were watching it on TV. The way, because about around that time, that's where the wrestlers starting to get more and more of their signature moves, signature stances, more suits, more costumes that you can unlock. And that was another good thing about it. When the season modes and the different season modes, they always had these, because like I said, video games at that time, in terms of fixed reward, it was so much better than what it is today. Because back then they didn't have any of the DLC and the paywalls and all the other stuff. And yeah, you already know for anybody who's a gamer. But back then, everything was through fixed reward. So there were certain things that you can do in the game to unlock costumes, to unlock more venues. Because not all of the venues were always unlocked. And most of the time, you would start off with your Smackdowns and Raws, maybe one main event, but then you had to unlock the rest of the main events, and then you would be able to unlock certain costumes, because some of the wrestlers, the roster, they had multiple costumes that you can unlock. But Here Comes the Pain. Here Comes the Pain was probably the one that really stood out to me the most, because it was just so intriguing to watch. I mean, it was just certain characters, it was just certain wrestlers, like Booker T, like one of my personal favorites. Just watching him, like the way he had his own walk animation, he had his own stance animation. I mean, the way that the bookend would look, the way that the scissors kick would look, and he would do the spinneroonie and all that stuff. The entrances got more better too, because in the beginning, SmackDown, the original and Know Your Role, the way that the entrances looked, it was basically they would show the Titantron, and then the model would show up in front of it. So if you were to look at it, it kind of looks like it would be like a green screen feature if it was in reality. But the way that it looked in the digital game, in the digital world, they basically just played the Titantron, and then your character would be in front of it, going through the motions based on whatever their interests looked like. So it was really different. But only the first two games did that. And then with Just Bring It was pretty. I'm telling you something. Just Bring It, out of all of the SmackDown games, I would say Just Bring It was probably the most aesthetically pleasing on the eyes, and in terms of how the game looked, and like the menu, the way the font looked, and the music was probably my personal favorite. I love the music in Just Bring It. The menu music, even when you're creating a superstar and stuff like that, the way that the narrator sounded and stuff like that. Like, for example, if you picked any game, what would it be? Exhibition, survival, falls count anywhere. It was so intriguing just to listen to. And for some reason around that time, for us old school gamers, you had the memory cards. For some reason, Just Bring It carried the most memory. It took the most memory. And a buddy of mine had like a Game Shark and stuff like that, and where you can do all this crazy stuff in the game. But yeah, Just Bring It it stood out too, as much as Shut Your Mouth did. It really stood out. And that's when they started adding a little bit more reversal animations and stuff like that. It was very, very Greco-Roman style, like, because Kurt Angle, who appeared in Know Your Role, that was the first one he appeared in. And then when Just Bring It came out, they started adding all of these type of Greco-Roman type of reversals and stuff, like with the fireman carries and wrist locks and takedowns and stuff. Like, it was very, very collegiate style wrestling type, the way the characters were reverse the maneuvers and stuff like that. But that's when the finishers really became intriguing, when Just Bring It came out. They started to look more polished and stuff like that, and they started to mimic how they looked on television. That's how realistic the finisher started to look. The pedigree and stunner, as always. The crazy thing is, like, each SmackDown game that came out, it was always a different stunner that they would put into the game. And the animations, that was the great thing about it. The animations were constantly changing and evolving and stuff like that. And of course, the roster became more extensive, and the features for the cutscenes of the season modes will get very better and stuff like that. I mean, the game just got better as the years went on, and we were always looking forward to what the next one was going to be like. And the commercials are always fun to see and stuff like that, just to see all the wrestlers. And of course, Mr. McMahon would appear in them sometimes, stuff like that. It was just a different world back then for gamers, man. I mean, just the branding and the advertising that went into them, especially for a wrestling game, because you don't have a lot of wrestling fans as you did back then as it today. Wrestling is not really as popular as it used to be. I mean, you still got some great people out there. I still try to keep up with at least some from the highlights and stuff like that. But back then, man, the Attitude Era, it is still. I mean, the WWE still hasn't topped that era. They still haven't, in my opinion. I think a lot of people would agree with that. But just bring it. It started a new wave of how the SmackDown series was going to pan out. At least in my opinion, I think Just Bring It really started it. The entrances got better, the full-fledged entrances, the way they would look. I remember one of the most intriguing entrances I've seen on Just Bring It was probably Triple H's. When Triple H would come out and the multicolored, with the red and the green and the blue, like how Triple H would come out with the water bottle and spitting the water and stuff like that. His entrance looked really, really good. It looked like you were watching TV, and that's one thing that me and my buddies, we would always pick up on. Whenever we would see the entrances, signature moves, finishers, we will always make comments about, God, man, it looked like we're just watching TV. Like, for example, if you just, it's assigned all CPUs just to fight each other. We're sitting there just watching the CPUs fight, go at it. It was like we were watching TV. That's just how crazy it looked. And then, of course, I believe, Just Bring It is when they first added the commentary. There was no commentary in the first two. And then Just Bring It, you had Taz and Michael Cole. And even though the commentary was still very new when Just Bring It came out, sometimes when you hear Michael Cole and Taz talk, it was kind of robotic. But like I said, they were just starting out. And for the initial installment for commentary, I mean, it was revolutionary. Because, as a matter of fact, me and my buddies used to joke about that. He said, "You don't want to catch Stone Cold Stunner tonight." There were just certain comments like that because the way they plug the dialogue. Because every time one of the wrestlers would do a finisher, the announcers would react to it like angle slam or choke slam, tombstone pedigree, rock bottom, game over. They would, like I said, it was like you were watching television. So that was very, very cool to see. Hearing the announcers get into it, and whenever you even this goes back to the first one. Even whenever you would do your finisher, because back during wrestling, people still had the old school cameras, the cameras that had the flash on them. And now everybody uses their phone and stuff. But back then, that's one thing I missed too. People used to have like the signs and stuff, and they were taking the pictures. So every time when a person would do his finisher, you would see all of the camera flashes and stuff like that. You don't see it much anymore. But back then, it was crazy. And the games put that in there. Whenever a character would do their finisher, camera flashes and stuff, and the crowd would actually react to it. But yeah, man, I mean, just going into the different matches, when you see the TLC matches and the ladder matches, the cage matches, the table matches and stuff like that, just everything that you can do, it got so much better in terms of the gameplay, how you can interact with the weapons, all of the different objects that you can use. And of course, I'm saving Here Comes the Pain from the last, because Here Comes the Pain was probably the best one because it was all of those games and more. Here Comes the Pain was by far the craziest one, man. I mean, that's one. Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar made his introduction in Shut Your Mouth. When Here Comes the Pain came out, he was the face of it. That dude had moves that would just, they wouldn't even fair. I can't even account, man. I mean, like, for example, I mean, the way Brock was in Shut Your Mouth was great. He had a lot of his own signature moves and stuff like that. But when Here Comes the Pain came out, Brock was a beast. He was probably like the number one beast in the game. Goldberg too. I mean, those two were just ridiculous. And Rock was very fun to play with too, because right around Here Comes the Pain time, that was when the Hollywood Rock came out. Rock had all of those different. I'm telling you, man, it's just so many different signatures that all of the wrestlers had back in the days. Signature movements, signature taunts. Certain characters had wake up moves where they would like stalk you and wait till you wake up so you can go into the finish maneuver. It was just so fun to play. Different types of signatures, taunts. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record repeating and stuff, but just going back in time and just remembering the feeling that I had when I first started playing these games. It was monumental. It was absolutely monumental to play. And all of us, of course, all of my boys, we would create our own characters. We all had our own styles. the characters that I would always create, he was like a cross between like a roughneck with with technical, because when you create your character, you had like these different categories. Like you had power, you're speedy, you're technical, you're roughneck. I believe that's all of them. But yeah, power was like your powerhouse moves, like power bombs, super power bombs, and press slams and stuff like that. And then your technical were kind of like your suplex moves. And then your speedy were kind of like your cruiserweight type of moves. Roughnecks were kind of like your strikes. So my character was always like a cross between like a roughneck and a technical. That's one thing that I've always really enjoyed and stuff like that. And it was really fun to see all of my buddies, how they would create, because that was a huge portion of the fun, just us creating our characters, getting them right and stuff like that, designing our costumes, our interests and stuff like that. And that was the one thing that we always used to do. Whoever was like creating their character, designing their characters, the rest of us would just sit there and watch them, work their magic and stuff like. Because that was just a huge portion of the fun, just creating your character. That was the repeating thing that we would always do whenever each game would come out. We would always create our own characters, because it added it added another gear to the fun. It was already fun playing with all of your favorite characters, but when you created your own, it was just a new level of fun. And the crazy thing about it, I believe Just Bring It was the first one to do it. When you're playing through the season mode, you get to unlock certain moves too, which was crazy. I remember my buddy, he had unlocked a different array of these what they call it, the Shining Wizard moves now, but back then they were called Flash Magic, and there was like 12 of them. And my buddy of mine, he kind of like designed his character around those type of maneuvers and stuff like that, and it was just really, really cool to see. My buddy Fox was kind of like a rock type of character, and my buddy BJ was kind of like a Eddie Guerrero type of character mixed with a Chris Jericho type. My guy, I guess you could say he was kind of like he was kind of like a Stone Cold, or like a Booker T mixed with a Kurt. I guess you could say, I don't know. It was like kind of like strikes with suplexes. My buddy Money, he was a Triple H guy, so there was a lot of Triple H in his game, stuff like that. And my boy Chris, he was like probably the powerhouse out of all of our characters. I mean, that guy was like a combination of Undertaker and Kane. And every time when we would have all of our guys and throw them in a match together and just watch, Chris's guy would be the one that would win the most, because he was just the strongest. You made one finisher from him and it was over. He was like a Goldberg and a Kane together, and like with an Undertaker as well. I mean, he was just a powerhouse. And my boy Flame was a big Test fan, so he would always have like the big boot finisher maneuver that he put on his guy. He was a combination of like a Test and like a Kevin Nash type character, and with a little bit of Scott Hall as well. So yeah, man, it was just so much fun, and it just brings back so many memories for us. And I'm glad that my boy Money asked me to talk about this one, because it brings back a lot of memories. Here Comes the Pain. Oh, and Here Comes the Pain was the first one that added body damage. For example, when in game, it would be like this little picture of a body, and you would know, because certain moves had different areas that you could target. The arms, the legs, the torso, and the head. And Here Comes the Pain was the first one to really add that. It wasn't perfected, because it was the first one to do it. It wasn't perfected, but it was going into a right direction. And as the games progressed, the body targeting system got very, very better. And I can honestly say I believe that the 2K games do it the best. The 2K wrestling games, you can be very, very technical in terms of limb targets. And in those games, being like a submission style type of wrestler that targets a particular area, so by the time you do your finishing maneuver, that's a submission maneuver, it would make it more susceptible to the person who's applying. What I'm saying? You're just targeting one area all day, and your arm's red, and next thing you know, you do like an arm submission, it's over. But Here Comes the Pain was the first one to add that. But the crazy thing about the body thing, about the body feature, is that if you had like a very strong character against like a weaker character, it was no chance. It was no chance. Like if you had like a Brock or a Goldberg going against like a Hurricane, or like a Jeff Hardy or somebody, like a weaker character, every single move that the powerhouse did to the weaker character, their bodies would just flash all the time. I mean, it would be like double the damage. So that was probably the biggest thing in Here Comes the Pain that was very, very, I guess you can say kind of imbalanced because they first introduced overall stats in Here Comes the Pain. The other ones didn't do that. Here Comes the Pain was the one that added the stats, so you can really see how strong a character was, how good they were in submission, how well endurance they were, how what their durability was, how much damage they could take, and also what was it? It was power, endurance. I believe it was durability and submission, and I believe charisma. I think it was another one. The charisma was based on how fast you can get your special maneuvers because that's how it was. It was these meters. So like I said, it was kind of like it had like a fighting game element to it. You in fighting games like Street Fighter stuff like this, you fighting for your meter, and then once you get a super, then you can do it. That's kind of like how the Smackdown games work. You can taunt to fill up your meter to get a special, or you can just fight for it. And then of course, having the ability to reverse strikes and reverse specials and stuff like that. That was a big one. You can reverse specials and stuff because like once a person had a special, it didn't mean that game was over. They can just do it to you. You had an opportunity to reverse it. But I believe if I'm not mistaken, I believe the way the older games worked around, I guess you can say, was it Just Bring It? I believe, was it Just Bring It, Shut Your Mouth, Here Comes the Pain? It was one of those three where you can reverse the finisher, but I think you needed a finisher yourself in order to reverse it. And I believe Shut Your Mouth was the first one where you introduced where you can steal your opponent's finisher. For example, if I'm playing with like Booker T and I'm going against The Rock, I can do a people's elbow on The Rock. That was a feature too where you can steal your opponent's finisher. But I think you needed 2 finishers to do that because the max was 5. You can store up 5 finishers. I believe you needed 2, but like I said, it's been so long since I played them. But yeah, man, it was just so great to play, and I hope I've packed enough information to paint a decent picture for people who may not be familiar with the series. But yeah, man, it's WWF, well, WWE now, Smackdown. And like I said, the 2K games are doing a good job. They're pretty cool too, but it just doesn't carry the same weight as the Smackdown series. The Smackdown series did it the best behind. Like I said, I need to talk about this wrestling game too, WWF or WWE No Mercy. That was a big one too. But the Smackdowns. But since we only got maybe, as far as the 64 ones, we only got like 3 or 4 of those games. Smackdowns, we got 5. Well, technically, we got more. We had because after Here Comes the Pain, they had the WWE SmackDown versus Raw series. They decided to put the brands against each other, and they created those games too, the SmackDown versus Raw series. And I can't remember how many of those were. Maybe a good 3 or 4, I believe, before they turned them into the 2K version games. But yeah, man, SmackDown, know your role. SmackDown, Just Bring It. SmackDown, Shut Your Mouth. SmackDown, Here Comes the Pain. Once again, I hope I packed enough information here to paint a picture for you guys, and for those who can appreciate, a different era of gaming, especially around, the late 90s, early 2000s era. If you can appreciate that era of games, and if you are a wrestling fan, I highly recommend that you play those games. I highly recommend it because I can say the one thing about, the professional wrestling. I mean, I still, will always have a deep fondness for it, but obviously it's not as good as it was, during the Attitude Era, the WCW, Monday Night Wars era, and the Ruthless Aggression era. Yeah, I mean, that era still hasn't been topped, at least in my opinion. And I do keep in touch with, well, not keep in touch, but I do, watch other people's videos on YouTube about how they feel about it. And a lot of us agree with it. They still haven't topped that era. And it is very, very fortunate that around that era they were able to come out with so many different great games around that era that really was a testament to that era, the Attitude Era, the Ruthless Aggression era, and that SmackDown series, man, from the first one all the way to Here Comes the Pain, man. It captured an era of wrestling, not just from video games, but watching it on TV as well. It captured a huge chunk of that wrestling that still holds dear amongst a lot of wrestling fans. But yeah, man, this your brother Bleak signing off. Until next time, Safe journey.